You round the last rise and the world goes wrong. The smell hits first. A sick, sweet reek that sticks to your throat and makes your eyes water. Then the sight, not trees, not a wood, but ranks and ranks of poles, each crowned with a human body. Thousands of men nailed to the sky in neat geometric order, their limbs pinned in the same unnatural angles. Some are shriveled husks, some are still twitching, some are making a sound that isn't quite a scream and isn't quite a prayer. Your sultan stops, studies the field, and then does something the history books rarely note. He turns his army around.
This is not the work of a madman.
It is a calculated tactic, psychological engineering turned into a weapon. The man behind it, known to history as Vlad, did not improvise horror. He learned how to manufacture it. What you think you know about the stories and the caricatures misses the point. The spectacle of impalement, the cold staging of suffering, the use of corpses as a landscape of terror. These were all part of a deliberate, strategic program that reshaped politics and fear across borders. Look back to the boy who became the instrument of that program. At 11, Vlad's life was folded into a bargain between rulers. His father surrendered his sons as hostages to an empire that spoke a different language and practiced terror with disciplined routine. In Ottoman palaces, the boys were given comforts and schooling, a camouflage for a more insidious education. Vlad watched up close how an ascendant power wielded fear as governance. He watched rituals of punishment and the ritual's effects on subjects, and he took notes in a mind that would not forget. Where his younger brother adapted and became pliant, Vlad did not. He absorbed the lessons of cruelty and learned their mechanics. The timing, the display, the theatricality that made punishment travel farther than a sword. When he finally returned home, alone, dispossessed, and surrounded by enemies, the impulse that had been forged inside him was not merely revenge. It was design. He would turn terror into policy. His coronation feast provides the blueprint. Where other rulers might have executed rival nobles in secret, he staged their destruction as civic instruction. Men who bragged about surviving rulers were sifted out and treated as demonstration material. The old order was not merely overturned, it was methodically disassembled. Some were impaled almost immediately, placed so their deaths were prolonged and therefore instructive. Others were set to work rebuilding fortresses with their bare hands until exhaustion and exposure thinned their numbers. This was governance through deterrence. Create such total and inescapable humiliation that submission becomes self-preservation. When the Ottomans demanded tribute and obedience, the reply was not diplomatic, it was theatrical cruelty. Envoys who failed to respect custom were not killed outright. They were mutilated and returned as living signs, turbans nailed to skulls, walking proof that defiance produced degradation. The message was unmistakable and designed to travel. This is what will happen to you if you refuse. Impalement in Vlad's hands was surgical theatre. It was engineered to maximize exposure, prolong agony, and amplify rumor. The stake was selected, oiled, and positioned to avoid instantaneous death. Instead, it relied on the slow upward drag of a body's own weight to do the worst of the work. Placed along roads, in fields, and around city approaches, often in carefully calculated patterns, these bodies functioned as a new kind of boundary marker, territorial signage written in flesh. Different heights signified rank. Geometric arrays turned suffering into a landscape of dominance. It was not chaos, it was propaganda made structural. Reports, some contemporaneous, some propagandistic, tell of scenes so extreme that they became the stuff of pamphlets and woodcuts across Europe. Yes, these accounts were amplified by those who hated him, but the core effect was unmistakable. When Mehmed's army at last reached the capital's approaches in 1462, veterans who had witnessed battlefields and sieges stopped in their tracks. Men fell to their knees, vomited, deserted. Where military force met a new kind of warfare, the calculus of conquest shifted. You do not march a human colossus through a display that breaks the mind of your troops. What followed was not a simple victory for Vlad. His methods achieved immediate, brutal results. A major Ottoman advance stalled, the Sultan withdrew, and the domain of Wallachia bought a temporary breathing space. The terror's effectiveness is ambivalent. It cowed enemies, yes, but it also burned bridges of trust and alliance. Regional powers that might have otherwise offered support hesitated at the spectacle. Allies saw a ruler who mastered fear at the cost of isolation. The very logic that made impalement useful as a deterrent also made Vlad a dangerous, uncontrollable figure in the eyes of potential patrons. And history kept moving. Mehmed would return with other campaigns and other contingents. Vlad's life continued inside the same uneven cycle of brutal reprisal and fragile dominion. He rode the momentum of terror, but he could not indefinitely turn cruelty into stable governance. Personal enemies, shifting alliances, and the implacable politics of neighboring powers slowly eroded his position. At different moments he reclaimed power, at others he lost it. Sometimes he was the hunter, sometimes the hunted. An inconsistent arc that ends without the tidy closure of legend. What matters in the long view is not only the specific outcomes, but the method. Vlad took a set of imperial techniques, public punishment, ritualized humiliation, bureaucratic categorization of captives, and turned them into a concentrated, performative instrument. He used spectacle to rewrite the emotional geography of a region. Routes, once safe, were now marked by warning. The very idea of travel, of leaving a home, carried an extra weight of terror. News of his methods traveled faster than any army, and the rumor of them became an extension of strategy. This is the piece of history we rarely confront honestly. How governance and terror can be two sides of the same administrative practice. Empires teach lessons about power. Individuals sometimes take those lessons and intensify them into new, more intimate engines of control. Vlad's forest was not only about bodies nailed to poles, it was about the architecture of fear, a system that used human suffering as currency and as a means to reorder political life. If you step back, the scene returns to its starting image, a soldier, an odor on the wind, a line of stakes into the distance. The immediate tactic worked. The long-term story is more ambiguous. Terror can win battles and stall invasions, but it also reshapes a ruler's fate in ways that no single triumph can foresee. The field of impaled men could halt an army. It could not guarantee heirs or loyalty beyond the horizon. Those who survive such reigns inherit not stability, but a culture of dread. So what did this all change? It changed how future leaders thought about deterrence. It changed how stories traveled across borders, how pamphlets and tales hardened into reputations that outlived regimes. And it changed how we, reading centuries later, have to reckon with the messy overlap between strategic calculation and moral disaster. The terror worked, the retreat happened, and Europe learned, in both literal and figurative terms, that sometimes the most effective weapon is not a gun or a cannon, but a tableau of anguish made permanent on the land.